Okay, so the last thing we covered was we looked at some data forecasting and we talked about trending data. Next, we're going to go back to what we were originally talking about and open up some more of those queries. So I'm going to go back into my folder, and this time we're going to open up the product sheet, which is the other sheet that's in the folder. And we're going to get this World Rhythm template. Okay, so come back here, I'll press Enable Editing. Let's move this over here. All right. Okay. So next, let's go to products sold by store. Okay. And we'll go up here to A3. Then I'm going to go to the data tab, and I'm going to make a new query from database, but this time I'm going to pick Microsoft Access Database. Right? Again, we can connect to all these different types of databases. And now it's going to say, where's my folder? I'm going to go back to my desktop, and I had a thing called module, right? So I have this World Rhythm database. This is actually an Access database, and I'll press import. Again, this could be sitting on your computer or could be on the internet. It's going to connect to it, right? And it's going to bring me back these tables, right? So it's going to give me a whole bunch of different files, right? I brought them in. And then I'm going to click on the items purchased table. And it's going to show me a sample of what's in that table, right? I could refresh it if the database changes, and I'm basically making that connection. Okay? Okay, so this next part is going to be a little repetitive. You're welcome to watch it, or you could just fast forward a little bit, because we're going to do the same thing 4 times. We're going to import these 4 tables. But what we're going to do differently this time than we've done in the past, we're going to add these to the data model. So like we talked about, the data model is like a big database that sits behind the Excel file. We don't actually see it, but we can query different data from it. And we're going to look at how to do that in a second, right? So now I'm going to go over to where it says load to, like this. And it's going to think for a second. It's going to bring us up this dialog again. This time we're going to press only create connection, so don't copy the entire Access database into Excel, only create a connection to that database, and then I'm going to press where it says add to the data model. And again, what we're doing is we're importing this file, 3.4 megabytes of an Access database. It's a really big one. We're not copying everything, we're just linking to it. So it's, as the data gets updated in real time, it will update our sheet as we build in those refreshes. And we're going to add it into the data model, and I'm going to hit where it says load. Okay. So what that's going to do is it's going to set up a query, and you'll notice that it's going to load 21,418 rows, right? That data is going to give me a preview, so this is what it looks like, right? It's going to tell me when it was last refreshed. I could view the data in the worksheet, edit, etc. But right now, it's just running that query, and every time I refresh, so when I hit refresh like this, it's going to grab the data. Now it's 7:33. It brought the data in, and it's just going to this file and checking if anything changed. If so, it will bring it in. Otherwise, nothing will happen, right? So let's go, and this is the item purchase table. We're also going to write a query to load data from the products table. So to do that, we're going to go back and repeat the exact same steps. So I'm going to go to new query from database. I'm going to go to Access database like this. I'm going to find my file again, which is in module World Rhythm. It's going to think for a second, and then it's going to bring up this dialog box, right? We're going to pick the product table. Okay, but this time I'm going to press edit. Instead of loading in the whole thing, I'm going to get into Power Query Editor. So I'm going to get all of my sources here, and I'm going to pick where it says item ID, and then I'm going to pick where it says category. I'm going to pick subcategory and description like this. And then I'm going to go to where it says remove other columns. So I only have these 4 selected, right? Then we'll go back and close and load to the dialog box. Now again, we only want to create a connection, so we don't want to import that massive database into Excel, which could potentially slow down our computer, or like you saw last time, it actually crashed the computer. And again, we're going to add that to the data model, and I'm going to press load. So it's going to think, And this time, instead of grabbing every single record, it only brought in 93 different rows that are part of that table, right? That are part of the product table. This is the item purchase table. Both of these tables, by the way, are sitting in a database. We have a total of 4. And now we'll keep on going. So this time, we're going to run a new query from database, Microsoft Access Database. I'm going to go back to my desktop. We'll go into Module. We'll grab the database. I'll hit Import. It's going to think for a second. Next, we're going to import the stores table. And then we're going to press on where it says Edit. And this time, we're going to select Store ID. So that's this one we got here. We're going to grab Store City, like this, and we're going to press Store State. And again, we're going to go and remove other columns. So we only have these 3 left. Again, they don't delete from the database, but we don't see them when we're running the query. This is basically the query that it's running. And again, if you want to see what that query is, you can click on Advanced Editor and see as it's writing that query script that's going to bring the data in, right? So now we're going to go back and press Close and Load To. And this time, we're going to press only Create Connection, Add to the Data Model, and we're going to hit Load, right? So now we have those 3, and you'll notice that we only have 5 rows brought in for stores. Again, there's only 5 store locations in that particular table. Last but not least, we're going to bring in our customer order data. Now, if you look at the file, our customer order data was in one of the CSV files. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to New Query, from File, and we're going to grab our CSV. And we're going to pick the one that's called 2-year revenue. So that's this one. And we're going to press Import. Okay, so it's going to think for a second, and then we're going to hit Edit. Okay, so now we're going to get into Power Query Editor, and we're going to go to the Query Settings pane. And under Applied Steps, we're going to hit Delete next to Change Type. Right, so everything will go back to, you'll see it says ABC for everything, right? After this step is removed, then we have values for everything. Now, why are we doing this? Let's scroll over here for a second, and let's take a look at customer zip code. Now, you'll notice that the customer zip code has to be 5 digits, but we have a big problem. And that is, if we type a number into Excel like 07920, what happens? It drops the leading 0. And that's a problem because all zip codes have to have a 0, right? So we're going to have to go in and before we do anything else, change the data type of this zip code in order to make it work. Okay, so next, let's go back here and we're going to click on Order ID. Then we're going to pick Order Date, Store ID, that's this one. And lastly, we're going to pick Customer Zip Code. And again, I'm holding down on the Control key to grab those columns. Right? So then what we're going to do is we're going to remove other columns like this. So we only have these 4 left. So Store ID, Order Date, Store ID, and Customer Zip Code. Right? So next we're going to click on Order Date over here. And we want to make these dates because right now everything is being treated as text. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to hit Transform, and then we're going to go up here and click on Data Type, and we're going to pick where it says Date. Right? So it's going to change it to the calendar icon, and that will turn into a date. Now, in the Query Settings pane, so that's over here, in the name box, we're going to call it Customer Orders, because now it just says Order Date. Okay? So we change that to Customer Orders. Okay. So, what's next? Next, let's go to Home, and we will close and load. 2. And again, we're going to only create a connection and add this to the data model. So now that we're finally done, everything's loaded into the data model. We have 21,000 records for items purchased, 93 products, 5 stores, and 14,000 previous orders. And again, we could use these all together, but they're all coming from different places. Okay, so we have the data that's sitting in the database over here. And we have the 2-year revenue that's coming over here. That's where our sales are from, right? And that's loaded into these queries. But how do we see the data model? You'll notice that it doesn't appear anywhere on these sheets, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here under data and click on where it says manage data model. Now it says it's an add-on. We have to enable it. So we're going to press OK. It's going to think for a second, and then it's going to pop up with the Power Pivot for Excel. So I'm going to bring that over here. And here we have Power Pivot. You'll notice that here it says items purchased. That's from the items purchased table, already pre-filtered using our filter. And it has 21,000 rows. Product has 93 rows. Stores has 5. And custom orders has 14,000. Basically what this lets us do is look at the results of the query. We could scroll through them if we want to see all the different records. But because we're not loading those into Excel in advance, it doesn't limit the amount of memory that we're using as we otherwise would, keeping it active in Excel, right? Now, a small one under stores, we can see that there's just 5 of them, right? And we could see how that works. Okay, so far, we basically see the different items that we brought in. Now, we could also look at these in terms of a database with diagram view, right? So this will bring in our different categories. Let me just zoom this out. So here you can see we have the 4 different tables that we are bringing in. Let's organize them a little. So I've reordered the tables. I have customer orders over here, items purchased, stores, and products. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect them together, and you do that simply by taking one of the categories and dragging it to the other. So we're going to go to customer orders first, and we're going to go to store ID right over here, and I'm just going to drag to the store ID in the stores box right there. Okay, so I just let go and it creates this connection, right? You'll notice this is a one-to-many connection, so it starts off with a 1 over here and has a star over there, right? So what that means is that for this store, there are many possible orders that happen, right? And for the store, each store only happens one time, right? So you go to one of the 5 stores, but there are many different orders associated with that store, right? It also shows this arrow, and that arrow means what direction is it pointing in. It says that the store table acts as a lookup table for the customer order. So we would go by store and use that to pull up all of the customer orders, the associated data. Now we're going to go and grab order ID again, and this time we're going to drop order ID by items purchased, right? So we have the same thing. We could use order ID over here to check up information that's in the items purchased table. So by using this order ID, it will give us what items were purchased. Now we're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to go to customer orders, right? Sorry, we're going to go to items purchased, my bad. And we're going to grab item ID, and we're going to drop item ID onto products. Okay? So here we have, for each one of those products, it will feed in data on which item was purchased, right? That's where we'll get our additional information from. And we have that same one-to-many relationship. Okay, so to get back to Excel, we'll just take this window and close it. And we're going to press Enable Content, right? Which will enable the database to start working. We built that database on our side, and we connected the tables, even though remember that we're getting one from a CSV file, we're getting other ones from the database, right, from that, that access file. Okay, so now we have the model, the data model working. It's holding all our information. And now we're going to create a pivot table. Okay, so what are we up to so far? We created 4 different queries. We put the queries into the data model. We then managed some of the data model relationships, and we connected them together, right? Basically by using store ID to link them together. Okay, so now we're on the product sold by store worksheet. Let's go into A4, and we're going to go to where it says Insert, and we'll hit Pivot Table. Now this time, instead of using data, we're going to use the workbook's data model. That's where the data is coming from, and we're going to put it into A4 product sold by store and hit OK. Okay, so we'll press OK, and now I'm going to close the queries window because we don't need that right now. And you'll notice that we have these special pivot table fields, and they're running on a database. You'll notice they have those little database there, right? So they're being queried from the database, but we could use them as if they were pivot tables. Okay, so we're going to click on items purchased, and we'll take a look at what we have, right? So these are the different headers that were in the items purchased database, right? So we're going to open this up and we're going to grab item quantity and we're going to drag that to values, right? So it's going to show that we have the sum of item quantity. So it's 29,979 items were sold during that 2-year period. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to click here. We're going to go into value field settings, and instead of sum of item quantity, we're going to change this to quantity sold like this, and we're going to hit OK. Right? So that's going to give us this, custom text which basically describes what the thing is. Right? Now let's go back in here, and we're going to click on number format. We're going to pick where it says number, and we're going to have 0 decimal places, and we're going to check off where it says use thousand separator. We'll press OK, and this gives us that number with the decimal separator place. Next, we're going to open up stores, and we're going to grab store city, and we're going to put store city into columns, right? And then we're going to, okay, so I did the next step. So I put in store city, category, and sum of item quantity, or I changed it to quantity. And you'll notice nothing works. And I said, oh no, what did I do wrong? So I went back to the data model, and I took a look at what was going on. I went into diagram view, and I realized I made a mistake. Order ID, I connected to the wrong one, right? So when I click on this link, I connected store ID to order ID, which is not good. So I'm going to go and delete that guy. I'll delete it from model, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on where it says store ID and connect that to store ID. That makes more sense. Then order ID should be connected to order ID. That's good. And then item ID should be connected to item ID. That one's not good. So I'm going to click over there, press delete, and I'm going to grab item ID and link it up to item ID. Now I think we should be good, right? So everything's properly linked. Store ID, order ID, and item ID. Makes more sense. So now, oh, there we go. So now, basically, when I put in store city, it's going to give me the 5 cities that we have and the totals, and then it's going to give me for category the 3 different categories that we have in the database. And keep in mind that these are coming from different places, right? They're different tables, but they're cross-referencing it all together based on the connections that we made in the data model. Now, because this happens over a 2-year period, we're able to add in a timeline slicer. So we'll go in here, we'll click on Analyze, and we'll press where it says Insert Timeline Slicer. And it knows from the Custom Orders database, the only thing that has a date in it is the order date. And we're going to press OK. And that's going to give us this timeline slicer. So right now, you'll notice that everything is blue at the bottom, right? Everything is selected. However, if we click on 1 month, we can scroll that along and we could say like what happened in the first quarter. Or we can go and say what happened in the second quarter. Right? We can go and move and shrink that depending on what numbers we want to look at. For example, what was April compared to March. Right? So this gives us the ability to add in that order date piece and compare. Right? Now we're going to build this into a really cool dashboard, but the first thing is we just want to check how we can control the numbers. Right? So this, now another thing that you want to caution is this one goes side to side and will open up side to side theoretically. You don't want to put this right below it if it's going to get overwritten by the data on top. Or if it was going up and down, you'd want to put this over here on the side potentially. Right? So for now we'll leave it over here, and this will let us clear it. If we want to see all the data at one time, we'll clear it and we see all the numbers in big. Right? So this lets us go through, filter the timeline. We're also able to look at months, quarters, or days. So let's go, for example, to quarters, and we could look at quarter 1 versus quarter 2 versus quarter 3. We could also choose years and take a look at like what was 2016 like versus 2017, right? So we could do that really quickly, and then obviously if I was doing this, I'd resize the box to be a lot smaller and give that interaction, you know? Then I can clear and go back to the big one if I wanted to do months. I could also look at days and so on, right? So that brings us basically up to the end of timeline slicers. So what we've done so far is we queried the database to build this pivot table. You notice that they're all using those filters. We grab some data out of the data model, and that's what's filtering in through this special pivot table. Now, in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at Power View and Power Map, essentially to take the information that we have now and to turn it into an interactive dashboard. Like, we're going to go a few steps further and add a bunch of really cool tools.